and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, where we are devoted to conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. It's Wednesday, February 5th, and I'm Cynthia Connolly, Director of Programming at the City Club and moderator for today's forum. We are at the Happy Dog in Gordon Square for our Happy Dog Takes on Everything series, and tonight we are taking on the reimagining of American theater. Through February, the stage production of Fat Ham will premiere at the Cleveland Playhouse. It's a cleverly hilarious retelling of William Shakespeare's Hamlet through the eyes of Juicy, a Southern black mama's boy during a backyard cookout. The trailer, I saw a trailer online, it's absolutely hilarious, 10 out of 10. The play unapologetically centers Black joy and flips masculinity on its head. For many, the play's premise might cause a casual reader to do a double take. Yet the production won the 2022 Pulitzer Prize winner for drama and was nominated for 5 Tony Awards, including Best Play. In fact, this summer, England's Royal Shakespeare Company itself will stage the European premiere. From Hollywood film to literature and theater productions, contemporary spins on classics are not a new concept. The 1999 film 10 Things I Hate About You, featuring Julia Stiles and Heath Ledger, immediately come to mind. But these reinterpretations often reach new audiences, create new models for artistic production, and create space for entire communities. Today, we all have the privilege of being joined by 2 of the best in the industry when it comes to artist creativity and challenging conventions. Raymond Bogdan, Executive Artistic Director at Cleveland Public Theater. And Nina Domingue, dramaturg and intimacy choreographer of Fat Ham at Cleveland. All right, we're going to get started here. Nina, first things first, when I read your title, and I know theater, but I don't know theater like a lot of people in here. What is a dramaturg?
Okay, so the quick and dirty definition is a researcher, but more specifically, a dramaturg is a literary expert that helps playwrights develop plays, helps directors, creative teams, and cast interpret text. They'll research all sorts of things. For example, Fat Ham is set in North Carolina. It's at a backyard cookout barbecue, and North Carolina has a very, very specific barbecue culture where it is whole hog barbecue. And this is the thing we discussed at the beginning, like with props and scenic and everything, because we didn't want people to think we were just putting a pig up there to be cute. No, it's real in North Carolina. Like, they have laws around when and where and how you can do this barbecue. And so these are things that are important to the context of what they're doing in the play. So a dramaturg will bring out facts like that. That's a very small thing in the larger context, but yeah.
You know, I find that really interesting because it's a very classic title for theater. I know there's a number of dramaturgs around the area and in the industry.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when you hear dramaturg, you think of like, something, investigating like history, like Civil War outfits, or how are we gonna, like, let's talk like, let's go to like the 1500s of Shakespeare and like get this right. And often when you see the title, especially around communities of color, you get like cultural advisor. How is that, like, how do you approach that differently, like with this like official title?
I don't think you do. What we did for Fat Ham, Cleveland Playhouse is a historically predominantly white institution. This is a very black play. It's the first time I think Cleveland Playhouse has had a black play by a black playwright, all black cast, black director, black scenic props, sound design, lights, choreography, music direction, the entire community is black. And so helping the company at large understand, no, there are some things in here that are specific and nuanced to Black culture, and some things that are specific to North Carolina. And it is important that we do not dilute them. Let the play be as Black as it is. And my favorite quote from Lorraine Hansberry, we find the universal through the lens of the particular.
Yeah.
And so it is important to be specific.
I mean, that's like an amazing segue to my next question. I'm going to stay with you a little bit, Nina.
Okay.
Why Fat Ham? Like, why is this production so important for the world to see, for Cleveland to see right now?
Fat Ham it sits at several intersections. James Iams is able to. It is not an adaptation of Hamlet. Let's start there. Is as much Hamlet as the Lion King is. So, and the log line for the Lion King is Hamlet on the savannah.
Concepts of Hamlet.
Some of the bones, some of the framework, and create a brand new story. And there are obvious parallels and nods that James has in the script. Ophelia becomes Opal, Horatio becomes Tio, Laertes becomes Larry, those kinds of things. But there are also things that he flips, because while Ophelia is Opal, she actually has the characteristics of Laertes, and Larry has the characteristics of Ophelia. So he uses double entendre in some very creative ways, but it really is a Black Southern queer story, and people should understand that going in. There is the father who dies, and his spirit comes back, asks to be avenged, but he's not a ghost, he's a haint. And that's specific to Gullah Geechee culture in North Carolina. And so we talked about all of those things. Understanding that Black culture drives the culture globally. And if you think that that's not true, go visit Japan and look at the people who are turning their hair follicles inside out to get hair like mine. Is real. Watch TikTok and all of these Pakistani teenagers who are learning hip hop from this Black choreographer named Ace, who does classes online. Black culture drives the culture. And a lot of times the things we say in our vernacular become the popular slang. And there's a thing we say in our community, they want our rhythm, but not our blues. And it's always been true. So if you want to know where some things stem from, you should be looking at all of the stories of America. And as a Black Southern queer woman who has a hidden disability, I sit at the intersection of invisibility sometimes, where people don't think I am what I am, and then they find out I am what I am. and then they go, oh. And then they realize some of the things that they thought they came up with. Oh, y'all were doing that a long time ago. Like, yeah, we were. We were.
That's great. And Raymond, I want to head over to you. Almost a year ago, 2 weeks, it'll be a year from our forum at the City Club that we had, and we titled it "The Future of American Theater." And it was really celebratory in nature too, because you just received that amazing grant in that program. Reginald Douglas was part of it. He's the artistic director of the Mosaic Theater. We also had Stephanie Ibarra, the program officer at the Mellon Foundation, who was talking about the new initiative. Take us back to that day really quick, refresh our memories of what the future of American theater was then.
Yeah, this is, I think people know Cleveland Public Theater is a theater that's pretty unique in the industry. And my whole career, I've been looking for who's out there that's doing the work we're doing. What are the other theaters that are either founded with the idea of a Black and Indigenous and people of color majority organization, or ones that became that? Number one. Number two, theaters that are doing almost all of their work are brand new works, world premieres, and are developing new work, and also theaters that are connecting to community in a different way. And so I was having a conversation with Company One in Boston, and we were just talking, and the artistic director there, Sean, said, hey, we should make like a cohort. And I was like, that's awesome. And we both were like, yeah, Rhett Douglas, who we both know really well. And as we started talking, we started inviting different theaters in. And ultimately, there are 5 of us. Reg at Mosaic Theater, and all of Mosaic Theater, Company One in Boston, Perseverance Theater in Alaska, that's also works out of Juneau, particularly because of their work with Native and Indigenous communities. and then also Crowded Fire. This is a company that has 6 executive leaders and is reinventing the model of leadership. And so we were all together, and there was an opportunity for Company One to have a conversation with Mellon Foundation. And they said, hey, normally you make a grant and then everyone applies and then you say, y'all are a cohort, right? We already have a cohort. And Stephanie Ibarra, who's a great artistic leader in her own right, really looked at this, looked at each of these theaters and came back and said, yeah, this is it. And then we were calling ourselves a cohort for a new American theater. And she came back and she said, everything's good except for one thing. Mellon Foundation doesn't do a new American theater. This is going to be the future of American theater. And we're like, okay. Right? but we don't see it that way. We see it as we're, it's one of the futures. And that's set against this backdrop of American theater shrinking by 50%. And that's just the fact. Whether that's theaters closing, we're part of National New Play Network. 10% of the theaters that were members pre-COVID have closed. And also all of our seasons are smaller than what they were.
Yep.
So when you look at the shrinkage of seasons, the shrinkage of staffs at many theaters, and the shrinkage of theaters themselves, we're really seeing this drop. So this is an important moment to say, what is the purpose of theater? Why do we need this, right? If it's not going to make money, then does it still have usefulness for us? And if it does, then how are we going to make sure that it is protected and held for our community? Yeah.
And you mentioned theaters are shrinking, staff is shrinking, audiences. Productions like Fat Ham.
Wait, not audiences at all theaters.
Oh, good. Well, that's great news.
Yeah.
So this is the interesting thing. There's a presumption that the impact of theater is getting less and less, but that's because we're looking at very small subsets. If we're looking at the 10% who are theater goers, yes, those are on the decline nationally. But if we look at people who are just going to the theater, right? Most of my audience at Cleveland Public Theater, when they come in, they don't consider themselves. The majority of them don't consider themselves theater goers, but they go to Cleveland Public Theater, right? And I imagine that is absolutely the same for Karamu Theater. The amazing Tony Size here. They're going because this is speaking to me. This is not theater. This is about community. This is about being together. This is about listening. This is about seeing my story on stage or seeing other people's stories.
And I think that's the importance of having, I feel like we're going to applaud every time anybody does that, and please continue to do so. We talk about the 10% of theater goers decreasing, but the audience isn't decreasing. Talk about the importance of productions like Fat Ham, the work that you do, Raymond, in making sure that theater is reaching communities like, my local Native community, which I know, Raymond, you and I have worked on a number of things together. And how is that drawing in folks that we might not have already reached, and the importance of that? Things like Fat Ham and the work you do.
Yeah, I think like with Fat Ham, I don't know, and I've done work at and with Cleveland Playhouse since I got to Cleveland in '99. I don't know that there has been a Black queer story ever on stage, or a show that had even one Black queer character. And so whenever people see themselves represented, it's like, oh, that's for me. And they're going to go see it. And they want to see, are you doing it right? Number one, are you doing it right? Did you get it right?
We absolutely do that for Native productions.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
1,000%.
Seriously, like, are you doing it right? Are you actually telling the story I want to see? And if this has something to do with me, I want to see. And it opens access to belonging. It's like, oh, if a story like mine is being produced on a stage the size of Cleveland Playhouse, then that opens the door in a different way. It says, oh, okay, I belong here, and there are many different places you can go in Cleveland that people may feel like they don't belong there until the door is opened. And people say, no, we're welcoming you. We want your story. We want you to be a part of this. We want you to participate with us. We want you to tell us if we did it right also, and celebrate with us as we celebrate your story.
How do we change the perception, the narrative, the story, I don't know what the word I'm looking for here is, about what a theater goer means? You say 10% are theater goers, but if you go and see a show at a theater, you are a theater goer. But there seems to be like, particularly with the number of communities that like, I'm not a theater goer.
The answer is always education. Always. Art is the first thing cut from school. But when I teach at CSA, I ask my kids, like, how many of you have ever taken a gym class? Everybody raises their hand. How many of you have an uncle, brother, cousin, sister, nephew, whatever, that plays basketball in the driveway? Everybody raises their hand. How many of you have ever tried to shoot from the free throw line? Everybody raises their hand. So they know that what Kobe and LeBron and all these people do is not only it takes skill, but it's what they do is exceptional because they've at least had to try to do it. What you have done with that is created an audience of people who appreciate the skill level of people who are doing it at mastery level. If you have never had to try to memorize a poem and say it on stage in front of a group of people like this, you think that everything they're doing up there is easy. I can do that. I don't care. And you don't have an appreciation. When we have arts education, it's not to create a generation of artists. It's to create the next generation of audience.
Yeah.
It's so that they know, no, you can find yourself in this. This is for you too. There is a place to express yourself, you know. Yeah. Education is always the answer to that question. For me.
I think for me, I want to go back to the question about whose stories we're telling. Because I think one of the critical pieces is it's not just whose stories are we telling, but who are we writing for? And what happened in American theater, two things that are really important. One is that as an audience began to develop, the theater began to make work for that audience. So that's why we began to narrow in on this group, right? Because instead of thinking about looking out and saying, this is the neighborhood I live in, instead it was like, who's buying tickets to theater? Let me make something for them. Right, which makes some sense. The other thing that happened very early on is that when the professional theater movement began, the LORT theater is what we call it, or regional theater movement, they were coming into communities that had amateur theater companies there. And it was important to say, hey, we're different than that, because they're like, we're professionals. We have training. We have dedicated our lives to this. And so the way they differentiated that is they divided theater into two kinds: professional theater and community theater. And at that moment created a divide in the mind of the makers and the legitimacy and the status that if I am community, then I am less than professional. And that is part of the legacy that we're living with all the time in the theater world. For us at Cleveland Public Theater, it's our approach is to be doing brand new plays that have not been seen elsewhere. So doing something like Gene Madison Showing Up Black, right? And this is going to be the first time. This is a full production. This local playwright who is working, I think, at a national level. And these are the important things, I think. And the other question about narrative is about who is telling the stories. And sometimes it's not going to be that one playwright, because sometimes those skills aren't sitting inside of a community at this point, because that community wasn't educated to be coming into the theater, or they think the theater is just not for them. It's not their language. They don't speak English sometimes, right? So a company like Masra Cleveland Al Arabi is this incredible place where people are telling their own stories to, first, their communities, but second, to everyone else, to say, look at us, we are here, we belong at the table, and our work is meaningful. And I think that is more poignant right now, more than ever, as we look at what's happening, right now with the Trump administration and immigrants. And so we go into a rehearsal of Teatro Público, or a meeting of Teatro Público, and we can't talk so much about theater until we talk first about what's happening right now. And that kind of visceral theater is, I think, what makes theater essential.
You know, when we're talking about challenging convention for this Happy Dog Forum, and Raymond, one of the things you had mentioned to me really got me thinking of, you know, challenging convention, particularly around the structure of storytelling itself, particularly with Indigenous playwrights, you know, not sticking to the traditional, you know, the beginning, middle, end kind of story arc. Do you want to dive into that a little bit?
I think so much of how we interpret art in the United States, particularly in Cleveland, because of the history of Cleveland and the investment of the robber barons and all these things like this, we have this very powerful European viewpoint. So, you know, I think about someone like Talise Campbell of Joppo Cultural Institute. Here's this artist that is just incredible and at the top of her game, and whose work is so powerful and meaningful. And I know for a fact that if she practiced ballet, she would be in a different funding situation, right? And so there are certain aesthetics, in this case, being on point or being barefoot, right? that become this determiner. And I think the way we think about story is sometimes the same way. Not to say there's not a place for everyone, right? But that story and how we tell story is also something that has been, I want to say, almost dictated to us by the European tradition, right? And so for me, what I'm really interested in is how else we can tell story and how else we can encounter theater. We just did this whole festival called Soft Launch, and it was 20 different pieces. Not a single one would you say this is theater, or you might say this is kind of theater, because it was a performance for one person, or it was a performance that didn't have that kind of story, and yet it had this very powerful impact. Or you might enter into a room and you just explore and hear voices. So the way we experience story and the way we experience art and performance can be this huge range. And I think right now, if we're gonna touch people and connect to people, we have to be reinventing. We have to be part of the research and development. And that's the other important thing. I mean, James Iams, you know, his first time in Cleveland was at a stage reading at Cleveland Public Theater. It's this kind, it's this idea that we need to be investing in research and development. And the other big problem, why is American theater shrinking? Well, look at any other industry in which you didn't invest in research and development, right? What's going to happen? And that's what happened in American theater.
Right. So Nina, I want to take a little bit of time too to talk about the other part of your title. You know, we talked about dramaturg, we talked about normalizing culture in that title, but also you're an intimacy coordinator as well, and that is something that is very important to the work you do. I do want to give you some time to chat about that.
Sure. So intimacy, choreography, and direction started to get more attention when the Chicago theater scandal happened and when the Me Too movement happened, which were kind of concurrent. But it's not new, it's just more noticed at this point. In my opinion, it is the way we should be doing theater, period. Because it allows performers, basically, it creates a brave space to do dangerous things. It is a way, we say that the first rule of improv is yes and, which basically means whatever your scene partner gives you, you take it so that the scene doesn't stop and you keep going and going and going and going. And when we talk about theatrical education, we're educating performers. A lot of times, you know, these young performers are like, oh, so, you know, I have to do all these things and, you know, I have to go to my deep, dark trauma and all this to be emotional on stage. And, you know, what intimacy, the first rule of intimacy choreography is no but. So that you're still allowed to have your personal boundaries intact. And everything in intimacy choreography is about a culture of consent. And we use the acronym FRIES. It's freely given, it's reversible, it's informed, it's enthusiastic, and it's specific. In other words, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And you know, the first training that I attended a couple of years ago, that intimacy director told a very powerful story about a play she was working on, and the playwright had simply written in the direction he tries to kill her, didn't say how. And so the director had envisioned, okay, well, what's going to happen here is we're going to have him, you know, strangle her. But the actress's no-fly zone was her collarbone. So that's when you bring in the intimacy choreographer. And so she talks to the director and she's like, what is it that that particular type of attempt communicates to the audience for you in the story? And she said, basically, I want us to see him trying to physically overpower her, but she wins the scene because he doesn't succeed. So they just had to find a creative solution to give that same impulse life without violating her boundary. And what they settled on was, okay, well, we'll choreograph, he tries to smother her with the pillow, which gave the same physical picture almost, gave the same power dynamic in the scene, so that when she wins the scene, the same thing is communicated to the audience, but then she still felt safe to be creative. He still felt safe because he's not making her feel uncomfortable. And most times people think intimacy choreography only has to do with sexual scenes or sexual violence. It begins with emotional intimacy. So if there's a character who is having a suicidal ideation, I would be there for support for that scene. There is a way that we tap in and tap out. If it's an argument between two characters that's really charged, where nothing physical happens, I can be support in that scene. And there's a way to construct it so it's like we know what's happening every time. We know how to enter it. We know how to exit it, so that we can put it down at the end of the night and go home and be people. You know, and I don't have to carry that with me for days and days and days. And it helps us keep ourselves safe.
Yeah. How common are intimacy coordinators these days, particularly with small to mid-sized theater groups?
It depends on the theater and how important it is to the process. What I've been finding is that if there is a very specific moment in a play, more people are calling for that support, even if it's just that you come in for a couple of days, help us choreograph it, come back during tech to do a check and make sure we're, you know, supported properly and everything like that. But people are very open to the idea.
Yeah. I also wanted to touch on, you know, an obvious elephant in the room, considering, you know, we just left the month of January and it felt like 80 years long. We're seeing a lot of increased attacks and actual policy and legislation come out around DE&I. And the work that you're doing in particular, Raymond, the work that you do, really unapologetically touches, communicates with, includes a lot of communities that you don't often see included in theater, in drama. Are we seeing a change in that? Are you feeling anything, Raymond, with the current politics that are today, immediately, or in kind of a double barrel question here, which is, you know, you can think on it. What do you predict might happen later down the road?
I'm not gonna predict later down the road. But I think, look, the drive in the arts, the drive towards excellence, the drive to make the most powerful experience for an audience, that work can't happen if you are not inclusive, if you are not equitable, and if you are monolithic.
Yeah.
So I can't do my work, I can't do good work. And I was talking to someone recently and they're like, can't we balance the idea of like, one, you know, like this idea of like EDI, and we're also going for excellence, but they're at the same time. And I'm like, they're not at the same time, they are the same thing.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, and I think it really is about theater leaders being committed to their mission and vision. You know, like one of the things that this season at Kermode, the Tony program, I'm directing Weathering, the next show that's coming up. That's a cast of 6 women. The show directly after that is Choir Boys, cast of 7 men. And that was very important to have both of those things on the season, because if we have a male heavy cast, most of American theater is male heavy. So it's like, if we're going to program this play that is all male, then we have to find one that balances that, so we're offering the same opportunities to the artists in our community. Yeah.
And we're going to get to questions here in 1 minute. So please, if you have a question, get that ready. We're going to line up right here at this microphone. I do want to sneak in one more quick thing. When we talk about DE&I and the importance of it, and kind of, you know, how a lot of folks, particularly in the LGBTQ community, are feeling. I know we have Cleveland Near West Theater down the street, who's been a target for a number of attacks and threats, particularly around their drag queen story hour. You know, we could talk about kind of the threats and the scare and the uncertainty, but the arts have always become like this focal point and almost rallying cry in moments like these. What are you seeing for arts in this next year, this next 4 years in particular? Kind of, do you feel a movement brewing?
The movement's been here. We come to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. That's Gwendolyn Brooks. That's Gwendolyn Brooks. I mean, it's always interesting. People are like, "Oh, are the artists going to do a movement?" It's like we've been doing what we're doing. It's never changed. Artists have always been the voice. I mean, I'm waiting for somebody to program a new version of Waiting and Lefty so we can get this general strike popping off in this country. For real, you know, and for Lefty was a play that was produced that helped the movement in this country. You know, the arts have always done that. I don't think that's a new thing. I don't think that's a reimagining. I think every holy text on the earth has some version of the phrase, there is nothing new under the sun. It's just a new generation experiencing it.
That's right. That's right. I would say, you know, one of the things is, I think also there is going to be a role, I think, and as we're building together, there's going to be a role of like this idea that we're all together here, that we are not alone. I think that is really the first thing right now is people are feeling very alone. People are feeling very afraid. And I think, you know, this couple weekends ago at Soft Launch, it was just like this moment of all these people in this room, and it felt like we are not alone, we're together. But that from that place, something is going to keep growing and building and driving, and it will continue. And some of that's going to be in shows that are blatantly calling for very clear change that can be written in a legislation, and some of that is going to be, like you were saying earlier, Black joy, and that is as important. Right, and some of that's going to be educational. You brought up about Haunted, the first National New Play Network rolling world premiere written by a Native American playwright. We're participating in it. It's called Haunted next year, and it's called Haunted. We're doing it next year, and this play is about land back. And this is a play that takes land back on in a very clear, upfront way, and says there is a way we can do this that does not break our society. And it's not about like, you know, oh, I'm going to lose my house. No. This is a reasonable and clear way forward. So the arts has to be part of it, but first we got to take care of it.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, we are about to begin the audience Q&A. For our live stream audience or those just joining here in person, I'm Cynthia Connolly, Director of Programming at the City Club and moderator for today's forum. Joining me on stage is Raymond Bobkin, Executive Artistic Director at Cleveland Public Theater, and Nina Domingue, Dramaturg and Intimacy Choreographer of Fat Ham, running at Cleveland Playhouse through the end of the month.
Opens Friday.
It does open Friday. And I'm actually going to make a quick plug here, and I'll say it again at the end. We are actually having City Club Night at Fat Ham next Thursday. That's February 13th, and Cleveland Playhouse was so kind to provide us with discounted tickets. So use code City Club for $50 tickets. It's a hefty amount off. So come join us, have fun. There will be a talk back at the end of the program, end of the show. So if you are here with us in person, you can line up next to the microphone to my left to ask your question. Please make sure you got a nice good queue over there. If you are joining us virtually or prefer to text in your question, maybe you're not like a microphone person, which everyone here is in the arts. I feel like everyone here should be a microphone person. You can text it to 330-541-5794. That's also on the City Club page if you didn't have a pen to write that down, and we'll try to work those in. A reminder to keep your question short, to the point, actually ending in a question mark so they have something to answer. And can we have that first question?
Talking about reimagining theater, I imagine there's plenty of room for, let's say, immigrants who come to the United States to seize upon a conventional European work, so to speak, and rework it to their point of view. And the same for us. We might take a play written by immigrants from the old country and update it from the American point of view. So do you think can you see this happening? So there's new perspectives all over?
I think for me, the first thing is to say, what do communities want to talk about? I think it's there's been this way, and I think I can see why it's very attractive to say, oh, we're bringing Shakespeare into this community, whatever that community is. And no, first just go to the community and figure out what stories they want to tell. I mean, this is the principle of Master Cleveland on Oddity. This is a group that includes first generation to third generation immigrant families, and they're telling their own stories. I think that's more important than adapting someone else's stories first. So I'd say that. And the second thing I'll say is I love what you were just saying about taking stories from other cultures and communities and sort of making an adaptation, but there's a slippery slope there where suddenly we're talking about appropriation and things like that. And so I just want to say, like a wise person told me one time when I was thinking about a project, they said, you got to sit down and think about this group and just ask yourself in front of your own ancestors, what would they say? How would they guide you in this moment? And I think that perspective really struck me, of just stopping and listening. And we don't do enough of that in our world. And hopefully theater can be a part of the solution to listening.
Hi.
Hey, Lenore.
Some people know who I am. So I'm a trained dramaturg.
Yes,
and
she
it was
is.
all about new play developments, and one of my former students is sitting in the back, so I'm very excited about that as well. Not dramaturgy, but nevertheless. But when it comes to theater and telling stories and research and development, and yes, that is definitely lacking in terms of putting the new voices on stage. The other thing that sound from what I'm hearing today that is also seemingly lacking, which is sad, especially given what's happening in the longest month that there was of the year, is how we forget about what has happened before. How we are, particularly in the theater, perhaps not documenting what we need to. In the 90s, we did bring queer plays to the Playhouse. This is not the first one.
Thank you for telling me.
I know, because I worked
You
on
were
that
there.
play, and it went all over the country. And so my question is, in light of everything that is happening, how do we make sure that we don't lose our histories, since many theaters don't have dramaturgs on their staffs to help record that history, and we've become such a digital oriented culture that we don't have things that are permanent. How would you suggest that we do that? Either of you or all of you?
That's excellent. I would say that is one of the places where we begin to call on community. I know at Karamu this past year at Homecoming, we named the pavilion after Queen Annette Bailey, who worked at Karamu for over 50 years and is currently the archivist, because anytime anyone stepped in the door, Miss Bailey wrote a note, made a file, and put it away. And we know a lot of what we know because of her work. And I think it's about finding those people in community who care about the work we're doing, even if they are not theatrical artists, but they care about what that institution means to the community, what that institution is doing in community, and helping to connect, because a lot of Karamu's archives have been digitized by the Kelvin Smith Library, and Miss Bailey and Raquel Chirvilanos were big, very instrumental in that process. and guiding that work. And so now you can go online and see everything from the Great Fire forward in Karamu history. And I think that's what we have to do. You know, Karamu has a lot of connection to the Fairfax Neighborhood Development Corps, and you can't be in Karamu for one day without somebody coming in and saying, so, you know, with my grandmother, and you know, finding people who are willing to collect those stories. And you know, the part of the reason why we don't have those staff dramaturgs and things like that is the philanthropic community and the donor community has shifted to project dollars, project-based dollars, and you know, preserving buildings, but not so much operational dollars. And you know, maybe one of the things that we could do is, one of the projects we need to do is preserve the history of the theater. And, you know, just for 2 years, dig in and get everything we can get to preserve those stories.
It's so important. Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think particularly for Karamu, this nationally significant.
The oldest Black producing theater in the country.
That's right. That's right. It's so important that we can capture that legacy and continue to document it. I think there's also something about the written word and the digital world, and there's also something about transmission. And I think there's not enough time that we're placing as a culture on just listening to our elders. There's not enough time to hear the stories. I one of the most amazing theater experiences I ever had was working on a production of Death of a Salesman, which is, you know, not the kind of show you would think I'd be working on. And this was at the Goodman, and then later went to Broadway, and I was the assistant director on that play. And the way the rehearsals were managed, almost every day, we would hear for over an hour these 3, 4 or 5 elders in our community sharing the stories, sharing the learning stories, sharing the stories about how you correct another actor on stage, a story about how to draw the audience's eye in. That's so much more than just technique stories. Right. And I think we don't have enough time with our elders. We don't have enough time to listen, and we have to really start carving that time out. That's a big part of why we're forgetting. It's a big part. It's because of this draw to the not just to the young, but to change, to growth, and sort of forgetting to stop and see and listen.
Great.
Thank you, and really thank you, City Club, for putting together this fantastic forum. And I look forward to seeing the results of the project of the Karamu history theatrically. It'll be very exciting. And Nina, I wanted to ask you, in that wonderful example you had of who's, you know, raise your hand if. How then do you get those students to understand the mastery of what it is on stage? Like you said something about doing a poem, but do you have a technique?
It's really about appreciation. It's about it, and it's about finding ways to keep arts education alive. You know, theater goes first, then dance, or sometimes they go concurrently. And visual art will be next. Music hangs on a little bit longer because we have marching bands and things, but they're always first. And I think parents and caregivers have to demand that the arts stay. I tell people all the time about the students at CSA. They are not some magic pool of children who are, you know, suddenly gifted and talented and no one else is. They're not. They're the same kids that are at every school in Cleveland. I've taught in most of CMSD's schools, right? The difference is, if I am learning to play this horn, and I figured out that when I play this horn, I don't feel as frustrated and angry because I have somewhere to put that energy that I didn't know what to do with. But I know I won't be allowed to play the horn if I don't keep this C in math. And I hate math, but I love this horn. I'm gonna get to C in math. That's the difference. That's it.
And if you have a school that doesn't have that, and all they have is basketball, and you got like, the kids that play basketball, then they get something, and maybe the cheerleaders, and maybe the marching band, but then what does the rest of the school do, right? And so we have to demand that arts stay in schools. And if we want to understand how important they are, thank you, yes, they have to stay. If we want to know how important they are, during COVID, during quarantine, our lives were saved because we had shows to binge, music to listen to, books to read, movies to watch. Those are artists that did that, and helping kids understand that not just the people who are on the stage are the ones that are important. There are the people who manage the money for the arts. There are the people who build the sets. There are the people who produce the canvas. There are the people who mix the paint. Like there is a place somewhere in this for everyone, and creativity is not siloed to the people who pull on the title. It's for everyone. We all have it. Thank you.
I want to give a quick shout out while I can. Miss Gina is here, and that is my daughter who's also here. Rainey Institute. My daughter goes to Rainey Institute for aftercare, and the way her face lit up when she saw Miss Gina, who teaches at Rainey, like that was an example of exactly what you're talking about, like that. I saw her on the stage for the very first time at Rainey. This is a kid who won't even come ask a question at the microphone because that terrifies her, but she was delivering a spoken word speech at Rainey. And so I really want to underline what you were saying there, because that is just, I see it personally with, we have, in the audience right here, it's incredible. So yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Ms. Gina. Thanks for taking care of the Rainey kids. Sean, go ahead.
Yeah. So Raymond, you mentioned research and development, and as coming from the music side, I know we're trying to tell the story that's different from the Taylor Swift story. That's where lots of money is. But in the artist development ecosystem, it's the artists and the places they play that effectively subsidize that research and development. There's no mechanism right now to reinvest other than sort of one-off things. And now you had incredible news this week at CPT. Please talk a bit about that, but also from a systemic perspective, other than sort of these one-off successes, where do you see the move to invest in the research and development in the arts coming?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, before I say anything, just one more time, give it up for Sean Watterson. It's so much for our community, and just like when you're here, I just feel like, yep, I'm in the Gordon Square. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, this is so important right now. One of the things that people don't realize when they go to see a movie or they're watching TV or these things is that all of these local theaters are the places that help inspire and sort of feed that entire industry, but we don't get to profit back. Right? We don't get a piece of that of that movie or anything else. But I think there's two parts here. One, how do we find a way as a nation or as a society to make sure that R&D is there? The market might not pay for it, just like the market won't pay for a lot of things that we need. The market is not going to pay for free parks, right? That's not going to pay for itself, but we want parks. So we create a system for them to be paid. And that is what I think we always need, a way to monetize that research and development. But there's another piece to that, and that is that there is no way that the experience of seeing on stage, whether it's an independent music group or a theatrical production, that I know that person on stage is probably 1 degree of separation. I probably know someone who knows them, or I know someone who knows someone who knows them. I am part of one community here, right? Overlapping many communities. That experience is profound and cannot be competed. That's a different experience than what movies and television have to offer. The key is that you can monetize movies and television a lot easier. And I think that's the question we have to keep asking. How can we make sure that just as we protect the metro parks and other public parks in the national forest, that we're also protecting the forests of creativity? There are places like this to have you.
All right, we are.
And one more,
Oh,
well,
go
just
ahead.
one more quick thing. Yeah, so Sean was
And
referencing.
another thing.
And another thing, Sean was just referencing this incredible gift from an artist, Joan Yellen Horvitz, a couture designer, an amazing woman who believes so strongly in adventurous and bold theater and the power of women as artists and all of these incredible things. And when she passed, she left some money. I think she didn't know quite how much it would end up being, to 3 incredible arts organizations, and Cleveland Public Theater is just really honored to be one of them. And we can't wait to name what is the former St. Mary's Orthodox Church after Joan Yellen Horvitz, the Joan Yellen Horvitz Performance Gallery, and we're so excited to break ground this year.
Uplifting a positive note to end on. Thank you once again to Raymond and Nina for joining us at the Happy Dog. Get ready. Forums like this one are made possible thanks to generous support from individuals like you. You can learn more about how to become a guardian of free speech and make a donation today at cityclub.org. Today's forum is also part of City Club in the Community series supported by Bank of America. Coming up next week at the City Club on Tuesday, February 11th, we just added this forum. We'll be joined by local leadership to discuss how the recent executive orders on immigration and refugee resettlement have impacted businesses, organizations, and Northeast Ohio communities. And then on Thursday, February 13th, City Club, we will have City Club Day at Fat Ham, as I mentioned earlier, Playhouse Square. Get your tickets and use code CityClub, all caps, one word, City Club, for $50 ticket discount. And there will be a post-show talkback with the cast, and Dan Moulthrop from the City Club will moderate. Be sure to join us the first Wednesday of the month through May this year, same time, same place, right here at the Happy Dog, for another conversation just like this one. You can learn more about all of our upcoming forums at cityclub.org. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, members and friends of the City Club, both here and streaming live. I'm Cynthia Connolly, and this forum is now adjourned.